Senior planner at the San Francisco County Transportation Authority and managing the Mission Bay School Access Plan. This is our town hall for our second round of outreach. So super excited to share with the new faces out there the study, where it came from, the scope so far, and for folks who have been sharing input all along, share some updates about our concepts and draft recommendations. Before we get into all of that, though, I do want to let folks know that we have interpretation services available. So I'm going to pause and invite our interpreters to make that same announcement in language and introduce yourselves for anybody who might avail themselves of transportation. If we can start with Chinese, then do Spanish, and then Filipino.
Yes. Hi，我名係阿星，我係今日會幫大家做呢個中文嘅翻譯，多謝大家。Next one, go.
Hello，我叫Steve，我都可以翻譯中文。
Hola, me llamo Abraham Ballín. Yo puedo interpretar y pasar las preguntas en español hacia nuestros presentadores.
Magandang gabi po. Ako po si Christina Ancheta. Ako po ay nagsasalita ng Tagalog.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sing, Steve, Abraham, and Christina. And if anybody needs Chinese, Spanish, or Tagalog interpretation, we will have breakout rooms available. So I think that's been communicated, but if you'd like to, please raise your hand. We can call on you now or drop it in the chat and we can make sure to get that set up for you. Before we jump into those breakout rooms, though, I'd like to invite a special guest to say a few words at the beginning of this study. For background, the study was supported financially by neighborhood program funds from our District 6 office here in San Francisco. That's Supervisor or Commissioner to the Transportation Authority Dorsey's office, and his aide, Madison, is here to share a few words. Madison, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, thanks, David, and thanks everyone for being here and spending your evening with us. Supervisor Dorsey is very excited for the second round of outreach on this project to begin. We are very excited for the Mission Bay School to be opening soon. And with the school opening, it's a really important time to be assessing the connectivity and safety for accessing the school. We know that there's going to be a lot of folks and families from the district that are going to be walking and biking to the school. And this is a great opportunity to assess some of the different barriers and connectivity issues with both the school and the roundabout for the broader neighborhood. You're going to see today some draft concepts for the roundabout, Mission Bay Boulevard, 7th Street, and some other concepts that are being considered. So we hope to have a good conversation today about these proposed alternatives and how these are going to impact the neighborhood. So again, want to thank everyone for being here and thank David and Transportation Authority staff for all of your work so far on this study, and looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madison. Without further ado, I am going to get started. All right. Abraham, just because I can see you in my screen still, can you confirm that you can see my slides?
Indeed.
Awesome. Great. Okay. Well, how this is going to work, I'm going to share a little bit about study, where it came from, where we're at, and then I have some questions at the end. But I'm going to move through our presentation and our draft concepts, different alternatives, and draft recommendations before opening it up. After I open it up, happy to circle back to some of the previous slides. Some of these do have sort of drawings about infrastructure improvements that might be a little bit hard to digest without sitting with them a minute. So happy to circle back to things at the end. And I'll also say that we've posted these slides on our project webpage. So if anybody is interested in opening that up and being able to follow along on your own at your own speed, you're welcome to do that. That's at sfcta.org/mission-bay-school, I believe. If somebody from the project team wouldn't mind dropping that in the chat and just confirming I didn't mess up that URL, that would be great. But what you're going to see there is identical to what I'm sharing here. So I'm going to start moving through it. At the top, I'd like to acknowledge that this is a shared project between the Transportation Authority as study leads and our close partners on it, the SFMTA. So my colleagues from the SFMTA are here to help support and answer questions. They've been instrumental in developing these concepts. So I want to say big thanks to them at the outset. And I'm sure they'll be able to introduce themselves as certain questions come up that I direct to them. So thanks in advance to my MTA colleagues and their close partnership on this project. Our agenda for today, I'm going to touch a little bit on the study scope, as I mentioned, and then a little bit on findings from our first round of outreach, which really focused on identifying key barriers to accessing the school that SFUSD is building in Mission Bay by active transportation. So barriers to walking and biking to the new school site. I'm then going to get into the new content for today, which are the draft concepts that we've developed to address those barriers. And after each concept, I'm going to share a draft evaluation of that concept, which tries to call out some of the advantages and drawbacks inherent in each design, and especially drawbacks and advantages as they relate to our core study goals. So we'll start with a sort of reminder for those of you who've been with us for our first round of outreach. Update on the goals for those of you who are joining us for the first time. Our draft goals for this study include safety, connectivity, and accountability. And when we talk about accountability, what we really mean here is making sure that we're doing robust engagement, offering opportunities for folks in language to engage, bringing forward multiple different alternative designs, and making sure that we're bringing forward feasible recommendations. As I mentioned, our sort of charge here is to try and make it easier to access the new school that SFUSD is building in Mission Bay by walking and biking. You can see where that school is for folks who are unfamiliar in the map on the right. After we identified key barriers to accessing the school, we've designed solutions for those barriers. Another thing that we're hoping to do, or that we have done here, is bring forward a network map, which identifies roads that could be improved to better improve bike access to the school, but which were not necessarily identified as key barriers. So those are roads that could benefit from improvements, but for which we don't have detailed concepts. I'm going to zoom back to our first round of outreach here briefly. During our first round of outreach, we really focused on identifying what the key barriers to accessing the school were. So we asked caregivers to mark where they would experience challenges getting to the school. You can see a map of some of those responses here. Broadly, our sort of the key themes that emerged were a strong emphasis on need for improvements at the roundabout immediately adjacent to the school, as well as the undercrossing of Mission Bay Drive between 7th Street and the new school. So you can see that reflected here in sort of the density of dots. We also heard about the need for the roundabout to remain functional for vehicle traffic, given that there are a limited number of gateways to Mission Bay neighborhood. This is, again, sort of a recap from our first round of outreach and reflects some of the core findings. That first phase of the effort combined what we heard in outreach with technical analyses that sought to identify the key barriers on which we would focus our solution development. So This process included measuring potential areas of focus by a variety of metrics, which relate back to our goals. You can see those as the columns in this table here. So we looked at an area's collision history and the existing facility comfort, the connectivity need, how close it is to the school, what we heard, and then combined that with what we heard from caregivers and did analysis about how feasible improvements would be. The map on the right shows some of the areas that were considered as key barriers, and then the area outlined in teal is where we landed our first round of outreach. So this area from 7th Street, sort of east-west corridor, which begins at 7th Street and stretches all the way to 4th Street, is what we identified as our key barriers and what we designed concepts for, which I will get into now. Yeah. So to this point, what I've gone through is sort of a recap of our first round of outreach and findings. We used those to identify key barriers and then have a few different alternative concepts to share for each of those barriers. So for the roundabout, we have 3 different alternatives that we developed and evaluated. For the Mission Bay Boulevard north-south couplet between the traffic circle and 4th Street, we have 2 different alternatives. Then we have some recommendations for 7th Street and the I-280 undercrossing. And finally, we have some additional concepts which were beyond the scope of this study to take on and fully recommend, but which we are raising up as ideas that could be considered in future efforts. So a little bit of orienting before I get into our different concept alternatives for the roundabout specifically. This overhead image shows the existing condition. So this is a satellite image that was taken, well, I'm not sure when it was taken, but it was taken before construction started on the school. So you can see the parcel in the bottom right-hand part of the screen is where the new school will be built. This image shows a parking lot. Right now, it's a construction site. The new school is coming. The parcel in the northeast here will be a park in the sort of not too distant future in the coming years. And the same is true of the parcel in the southeast there. So the roundabout currently has sort of developments planned for all around the exterior. 2 of them are parks, 1 of them is the new school. And you can see that there are the current condition for pedestrians includes sidewalks that run that abut the roadway on the left side, and a sort of wide arcing sidewalk on the right side of this. Similar, there's no real facility for cyclists in the roundabout. Something that was called out, we heard quite a bit in our outreach, is that folks wanted a separated path for cyclists to pass through this roundabout. So I mentioned we have 3 different alternatives that we developed. This is our first alternative for the roundabout. This involves splitting the existing 12-foot wide pedestrian pathway, so that wide arcing sidewalk around the right side of the screen, splitting that into a 6-foot wide bike path and approximately 6-foot wide sidewalk with a detectable barrier separating them. I'll also point out that in this alternative, the stencil within the roadway remains. We anticipate that some cyclists who feel confident sharing the roadway with cars would likely continue to do so. So even though this alternative provides a fully separated and protected pathway for cyclists passing through the roundabout, some would likely continue to share the roadway because accessing the pathway involves a sort of sharp turn, a 90-degree turn as you approach, which can be awkward on a bike to make. You'll also notice a sort of difference here between the drawing that's shown and the satellite image on the left, the existing condition. which are that the side running bike lanes, so those green bits on the left and right side of the screen, have been extended to reach the roundabout. So part of this design and part of every one of our roundabout alternatives is to make sure that the cycling facilities on Mission Bay Drive and Mission Bay Boulevards, the left and right side of the screen, continue to the roundabout rather than sort of petering out prior to the roundabout. So we've evaluated each of our alternatives using metrics which tie back to our study goals, and we've sort of captured those ratings in tables like this. So this is our evaluation for alternative A, and you're going to see something really similar after I show alternatives B and C. We can see that roundabout A really scores quite well in our safety metrics because it provides a separated path for cyclists. That's the sort of 3 pluses in the top row. However, a pedestrian trade-off is introduced because what was once a sort of very wide, a 12-foot wide pedestrian pathway has been narrowed to make room for the cycleway. So you can see that marked as the minus in the 3rd row here. Broadly, it sort of scores well in our connectivity metrics, and we estimate it being, in the range of $1 to $1.5 million to implement. It's also worth noting that this alternative A, would have a lower sort of construction timeline and impact than the rest of our alternatives. Rows where you see blanks mean essentially no impact, no change from the existing condition. So this alternative doesn't introduce sort of landscaping or parking trade-offs, for instance. That's why that 6th row is empty. I'm going to move on now to alternative B. Alternative B converts the existing sidewalk, so that wide arcing sidewalk, into a fully separated bidirectional bike facility. Then constructs new sidewalks on the right side of the roundabout here. So on the east side of the roundabout, where you can see sidewalks with cross-hatching. Those don't exist in the existing condition. Alternative B proposes to build new sidewalks there and then repurpose the existing sidewalk for a fully separated bidirectional bike facility. This is our evaluation of alternative B. It scores well on our safety metrics, but has a notable pedestrian trade-off. In particular, the bike paths cross the pedestrian path of travel on the sidewalk, and I suppose it's sort of a significant pedestrian hurdle and a potential challenge to overcome for ADA compliance purposes. Pedestrians in this alternative are also forced to walk adjacent to the roadway, whereas previously they would walk on the wide arcing sidewalk. The sidewalk in this alternative was sort of routed adjacent to the roadway. The cost here is likely to be sort of similar to alternative A, but could be a bit more expensive. One of the reasons, sort of unknown cost factors here, is building the new sidewalks on the east side of the roundabout cuts into a landscaped area, which is actually a stormwater retention area. And doing that requires mitigation efforts where we need to dig the stormwater retention area deeper or find other permeable surfaces or other surfaces that we can make permeable to sort of offset that impact. The cost implications of that are not yet totally known. It's also worth noting that this alternative would have a significantly more challenging sort of construction impact to navigate, because there are impacts to the actual roadway itself. There's also that reduction in landscaping that I mentioned for the introduction of new sidewalks. So if this is a bit much, there is sort of a recap here. Once I walk through all of the alternatives and their evaluations, there is a sort of recap where we'll be able to see each of them side by side, and I'll share our draft recommendation. This is alternative C. It would carry cyclists through the roundabout on the existing roadway, and then construct new floating concrete islands. That's the cross-hatching that you see here, which serve to separate the cycleway from the roadway and force drivers passing, sort of entering or exiting the roundabout, especially exiting the roundabout, to square up to cyclists. So the concrete islands are needed to sort of make that a safe conflict point between drivers and cyclists. One sort of unfortunate reality about the geometry here is that if we route the cycle path through the roundabout like this and implement those needed floating concrete islands, we're forced to shrink the size of the island in the center of the roundabout. So there's not enough right-of-way within the roundabout as built right now to accommodate the cycle path, the concrete floating islands, and then still have enough room for large vehicles to make the kind of turns that they need to. So we need to end up shrinking that white circle in the center of the roundabout. Alternative C scores fairly well in our safety, in our bike vehicle interaction metric. It gets 2 out of 3 possible plus signs because it does create 2 crossing points for motorists as they enter and exit the roundabout, which is a little bit awkward to navigate. But it's quite attractive because it doesn't involve any pedestrian trade-offs here. So the cyclists, which previously shared the roadway with vehicles, continue to use right-of-way within the current roadway. The major drawback here is the cost. So we've identified sort of major infrastructure challenges and major infrastructure relocations that would need to happen were this alternative to be pursued. There's also pretty significant construction timeline impacts here because there would be major impacts to the roadway, especially shrinking that center island. So those are our 3 roundabout alternatives. Comparing them side by side, our draft recommendation is alternative A. For sort of all of the reasons that I walked through. It provides a significant safety benefit. It fully separates cyclists, and it has a cost that is 5 to 6 times less than alternative C, and fewer construction impacts, a likely quicker timeline to implementation. I'm going to move on now to Mission Bay Boulevard, which has slightly more sort of straightforward alternatives. So we have 2 alternatives for this area. And just to orient, the roundabout that I just walked through is just off the screen to the left here, while 4th Street is the sort of north-south corridor that you see on the right-hand side. So these are the sports fields that are flanked by Mission Bay Boulevard to the north, Mission Bay Boulevard north to the north, and Mission Bay Boulevard south to the south. Our first alternative here would involve traffic calming measures to both Mission Bay Boulevard north and south between 4th Street and the roundabout. So this is fairly straightforward, sort of bread and butter stuff from SFMTA's traffic calming toolkit. Here are some of the treatments that the team thinks are likely a good fit for Mission Bay Boulevard north and south. And if sort of this recommendation were to be pursued, the immediate next step would be to take this to the next level of design and start sort of placing these in logical areas, seeking input from the community again on those more detailed designs. Our evaluation for the traffic calming alternative is shown here. It's a safety improvement, gets one plus here. It's not a 3 pluses because the roadway does remain shared with cyclists, but safety is improved when we sort of look at our bike and vehicle interactions. No new bike and ped interactions or trade-offs are introduced. In fact, we anticipate sort of pedestrian benefit to this alternative because pedestrians would also benefit from slowing traffic. Sort of scores well in our connectivity metrics, and also has a relatively approachable cost with low implementation impacts and a potential for a relatively near-term implementation. Our second alternative for Mission Bay Boulevard is to install a bi-directional bikeway on Mission Bay Boulevard South. So this would be a two-way separated facility on Mission Bay Boulevard South. Unfortunately, our analysis showed that the roadway geometries on Mission Bay Boulevard South are such that in order to accommodate like large truck movements at the intersections, a bike facility like that would not be able to, the protection would be lost at the intersections. So the safety benefit here, we only get one plus sign. It is a safety improvement, but the reality of the situation is that it would be protected sort of mid-block, and it would have to, cyclists would lose that protection as they approach the intersections, which are the most important place to stay separated. This alternative would also introduce some bike movements, which are not as predictable for pedestrians. They're sort of dealing with cyclists moving with cycle traffic from both directions in a somewhat unintuitive way. Nonetheless, it would be a relatively inexpensive treatment with a near-term implementation impact or near-term implementation opportunity. Also, definitely sort of worth noting and considering that this bidirectional bike facility would necessitate removing parking along the entirety of Mission Bay Boulevard South between 4th Street and the traffic circle. So the facility essentially replaces the parking along that few block stretch. As we compare these alternatives, our draft recommendation is alternative one, the traffic calming alternative. It has strong safety benefits, doesn't have any sort of bike and pedestrian trade-offs. In fact, it has pedestrian benefit and could be implemented relatively near term at an approachable cost. Okay, I'm going to just sort of keep moving here and share a couple of recommendations for the 7th Street and Mission Bay Drive intersection. The first of these is to implement a jug handle, which facilitates a left-hand turn for cyclists looking to enter Mission Bay on Mission Bay Drive. So in the existing condition, which is the image you see here to the left, a cyclist who wants to turn left here is forced to exit a side running bike lane on 7th Street, merge across a lane of through traffic, and then queue behind an existing dedicated left turn lane. So queue behind basically these two white cars here, and then make the left-hand turn with the vehicles in a protected turn phase. This jug handle would eliminate the need for that for the cyclist to exit the facility and swerve across the lane of through traffic, and instead allow them to make a protected two-stage turn and cross with a dedicated pedestrian signal. So it looks something like what exists currently at Market and Valencia, and you can see that on the right. Another recommendation we have is to add soft hit posts underneath I-280 between 7th Street and Mission Bay Drive to sort of make it visually apparent that there's a cycle lane here and prevent vehicles from encroaching onto it. I'm now going to talk about a few sort of what we're calling midterm ideas. These are not concepts which we are including in the study's core recommendations, but they are ideas which we think would advance study goals and could be developed in separate studies which have a more sort of mid-term implementation, mid or long-term implementation timeline. The first of these ideas involves Mission Bay Drive eastbound. So the stretch of Mission Bay Drive, it's fairly short between 7th Street and the traffic circle. This is currently 2 lanes. It's I'm gonna go back here quickly. The image on the left is the stretch of roadway that I'm mentioning. It's 2 lanes, but the reality is that it's only ever really fed by 1 lane of vehicle traffic. So vehicles can turn onto Mission Bay Drive here from 7th Street, either southbound or northbound, but the reality is there's probably only 1 column of cars entering the roadway at a given time. There's also only the Mission Bay Drive here next down to a single lane as it approaches the roundabout. So we have a situation where you have a 2-lane roadway that's being fed by a single lane and then disgorges or exits into a single lane as well. There could be situations where that additional lane is helpful for sort of storage capacity, storing vehicles, but we don't think that that is likely critical here for this short stretch of roadway. So there could be an opportunity to road diet Mission Bay Drive here from 2 lanes down to a single lane, specifically again in the eastbound direction, which would give us a lot more right-of-way to work with to better protect the side running bike path for which our current recommendation is soft hit posts. But were we to road diet, we'd have a lot more room to work with and potentially add more robust bike facilities there. Another potential sort of midterm idea to investigate would make use of the park that is currently expected to be built immediately north of the traffic circle and Mission Bay Drive. So you can see a construction drawing of that here. The green crosshatching is a multi-use path that runs through that is planned to run through the park. There could be an opportunity to force cyclists who are traveling westbound, so traveling left along Mission Bay Drive here, out of what is currently an unprotected side running bike lane and onto that multi-use path. That would free up some right-of-way, which could be used to add a 3rd vehicle lane along Mission Bay Drive westbound, which could potentially be a dedicated right-hand turn lane onto Berry Street. So this is trying to be responsive to one thing that we've heard from the community, which is that the traffic circle really needs to remain flowing, and that queuing from 7th and Berry on the left-hand side of the screen right now can be a challenge. So this would provide folks who are bound for Berry Street a sort of a way to get there and make that turn, where in the existing condition, they might get caught and sort of have to queue behind vehicles destined for 7th Street. Final sort of set of recommendations here is what we're calling our network improvements map. This is a map showing streets which the team has identified if they were to have improved bike facilities implemented, would really help connect the school to the city's broader active transportation network. So the sort of salmon-colored lines, salmon-colored streets on this map are streets which I just walked through and we have sort of conceptual designs for. The green lines on the map and the sort of blue barriers are called out here as streets which in subsequent work the city could look to improve, and by doing so would improve active transportation access to the new school site. So I have a couple of questions for you all that I'd like to sort of open it up to the group to chat through. But I'm going to come back to this. I have 2 more slides that I'd like to sort of round out about our next steps here. But while I'm going through those, if you wouldn't mind just sort of mulling over how these concepts land, do they feel like they are meeting the sort of needs of the community? Are there parts of the draft evaluations which you'd like sort of have a better understanding of or are not resonating with you? Are there other policy or programmatic needs which you'd like to see addressed? And then if we were to move forward with the current draft recommendation for traffic calming along Mission Bay Boulevard north and south, would love to hear if there are some of or other of the treatments that you think would work better or worse than others. So I mentioned painted safety zones, daylighting, raised crosswalks, chicanes. Would be great to get sort of community preferences about those different treatment options ahead of the next design phase where we'd be actually putting treatments on the map. Okay, so yeah, next steps. We will take what we learned today and through the series of presentations that we're offering to community-based organizations around the neighborhood this month and next, and revise alternatives as needed and confirm final recommendations. If we sort of confirm what are currently our draft recommendations, SFMTA would move quickly into the next design phase for traffic calming along Mission Bay Boulevard. And that would involve, as I mentioned, putting treatments on a map and sort of additional public engagement around that. Public Works would move into sort of the next design phase for the roundabout alternative. And we'd sort of continue discussions about next steps for some of those more midterm ideas that I mentioned and how to capture and move those things forward if we hear sort of positive feedback about those ideas. We then capture all of this in a final report and bring it to the SFCTA board, which we target for approximately July of this year. So that was quite a bit. Thanks everybody for sticking with me. I know it was a long presentation with sort of a lot to look at. I mentioned earlier that these slides are available on our website, so I'd absolutely encourage you all to go grab the slides and sort of flip through them at your leisure. But with that, I think that I will turn it over to the group for questions and ask Daniela to sort of help me manage the room and direct questions to me.
Peter, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation. I really, appreciate all the time that was spent into it, the multiple alternatives. I think it's great. I will cut to the chase with a few, comments that I'm sure we can chat more later. I think option 3 offers the greatest safety. And a crucial difference that I see between C and A is that A doesn't seem to offer a route home for the child that is, biking to school with their parent in the morning. And so I think, option C, you come in, you head counterclockwise, you go to the school, and then as you go back around, there's just not a path there. So I think there are some, critical details to go over, but, high level, I would say option C is worth pursuing. And I can imagine, although it's not illustrated here, I can imagine a quick build version of option C where cyclists are on the roadway with soft hit posts that I think could be, if it is not feasible with the budget to implement C as it is designed here, that a quick build version with folks on the roadway could be a way to do that. And I guess the last thing I'll say in this first wave is that option A seems reliant on some other projects that half of the circle, the northwest and the southwest quadrants, are not. My impression is that that sidewalk doesn't exist yet and that there's nothing in the northwest. So when we envision a circle, you have to go all the way around the circle to go to school and then go home. That it's, to me, option A is half of it is missing during the near term. And so depending on when those other projects are done, we won't have a real option for a while. So more could be said, but I'll leave those. Those are my initial reactions.
Thanks for the comments, Peter. I will just sort of speak to the last piece there and say that the astute observation that the facilities in the top left and bottom left here are part of parcels that are slated to be future parks and are currently in development. So we are working closely with Mission Bay Development Group and definitely understand that there will need to be sort of once we land on draft recommendations, or once we land on our recommendations, a phasing and implementation plan brought forward to make sure that things are done in concert, and that is part of our scope. So we bring an implementation plan forward as part of the final report.
And if I may, David.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Salivary. I'm a senior engineer with SFMTA. And I have a feeling the roundabout's going to require more conversation than just this public outreach meeting. And I think it's a great start to the conversation. There's a lot of nuanced details that are difficult to bring up in such a quick presentation. I would say a couple things. I understand where you're coming from, Peter, about the desire to have something right when school opens. And I would add that Alternative C is so impactful in terms of construction. Not only does it cost more, it's going to take far longer to design and to build, to the point where it may take as long as the park parcels to build out. And I'm not sure there's a quick build version of this that would be considered safe. And I think the nuance that I want to share, and something for y'all to think about, is the offset, the distances between the roadway and the bike crossing in this option is pretty small. So if you're a driver in the roundabout and you're turning right, really quickly you're on top of the bikeway. And concurrently, as a cyclist, as you're going around the roundabout, if you're not turning right to exit the roundabout, you can staying left to go around it. There's a very short distance where, while the driver's turning, all of a sudden you're appearing into the roadway. So I think this is the unfortunate aspect of retrofitting an existing roundabout as opposed to starting from scratch. So I'm not even sure. I know Alternative C looks nice and it looks nice and flowy, but I'm not sure it's a safer option. I would argue that A and B might be safer than C, frankly. So again, I think this is something that's worth talking about more. But I just want to throw those thoughts out there as we mull these concepts over. And something else that it's another design detail. We're working with Public Works to try to raise the crossings, and so especially where we can get bike and peds crossing adjacent to each other, it looks like a nice opportunity to make that a raised crossing 2-3 inches high that slows traffic right at that critical crossing point. And that's due to the topography of the roundabout, where there's existing drainage. It seems to work pretty well at a lower cost way. Otherwise, it might be very, very expensive to retrofit the roundabout. So I think that's another reason, not only to get more of an offset by having the bike crossing away from the roundabout, you can also consolidate it with the ped crossing adjacent to it and raise it at the same time. And so you get that traffic calming element right where motorists are crossing the path to travel, pedestrians and cyclists. So that's another thing to consider. Anyway, I know I fully expect we should discuss this more offsite for those who really are interested in the roundabout designs. Not that we can't talk about it more here too, but.
Thanks for the added detail and context, Mike. Daniela?
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Peter, also for your question. So a number of questions have come through the chat, but I also just to keep this going, I wanted to give folks the opportunity to raise their hands and ask questions verbally first before we go to the chat. If there are no other questions verbally, we can go to the chat questions. So does anybody have any other questions or raise hands? Okay. Jan, all right.
Hello there.
Yes, hi,
Is
Jan.
my great. So I was looking at alternatives A and B, which it seems like the draft proposal is heading towards A. Uh, One of the concerns I have with the 90-degree turns that cyclists would have to do, especially less experienced cyclists, as you highlight, is this is a pretty tricky thing for them to do. So you might imagine, young teenagers trying to make that turn, or people on those cargo e-bikes that are like, double length almost, trying to make that turn. And the risk that I see here is, first, if they have to also cross that curb cut to also regain the pavement there, they might, catch the curb cut in this longer bike, and crash. Uh, or in the even possibly worse version of the scenario is if they're on the roundabout on the cycle, the other one, and making a 90-degree turn out into one of the side streets. They may, overshoot the right turn and end up in the middle of the roadway, creating an unexpected conflict point, which would be very scary. So I don't know if there's like any mitigations that can happen to make this plan safer. I know this is a draft at this stage, but yeah, I'd love to see something like maybe it involves raising the crosswalks, something like this to like eliminate the curb cut from the things to navigate at that stage, but also like giving more space or more barriers to make sure that this like wider turning angles can be made safely.
Yeah, exactly. Bring up a great point, and it doesn't show up here, but it's something that we talked to Public Works about, is that we don't want 90-degree turns because one, they're just super awkward to make. And two, what if you have a larger bike? You might have a long cargo bike or one of those 3-wheeled cargo bikes, and having to turn 90 degrees in a very short areas, small space is just not realistic. So what we've talked to them about is actually flaring out the bikeway, adding a radius to it so that you could make the turn more smoothly, to exit the bikeway and to enter the bikeway in both directions, entering and exiting the roundabout. So it wouldn't be a 90-degree turn in a very small space. I think also that this design could be supplemented with some islands in, right where you see the white stripes in the roundabout on the exit toward the bike and ped crossing. There could be some islands there that protect the cyclists who might be turning in and out of the bikeway. So again, this is very conceptual design, and I believe David mentioned, I know he mentioned that Public Works is working on the design. They're taking this to about a 10%, and what that 10% design will help us understand, like, what are the real technical challenges, if any, and are there, I hate to use the term fatal flaw, but it's very commonly used. It's like, there's something that's really just not going to work for this design. And we'll find out in that 10% effort, assuming we continue forward with alternative A. That is something that we are very mindful about, is the ease of exiting and entering the bikeway without striking any raised curbs. And for everyone to do it, if you have a trailer or a large cargo bike. Did I answer all of your question, or?
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to hear that those things will be considered. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. Does anybody have any more questions verbally? Otherwise, we'll go to the chat. Or you can also raise your hand a little bit later if you think of something. Oh, okay. All right, Mitch, go ahead.
Hi there.
Hi.
Something that's not part of this plan, but I'm also trying to figure out a way to reduce traffic in the circle itself. And a lot of cars that are going down Mission Bay Boulevard East are really heading towards Berry Street. They go around the circle, they flip around, they wait at the traffic light, make the right turn where you want to have, we've proposed the third right turn lane, or the third lane for right turns. Is there a possibility of creating a little bit of a, I don't know what to call it, a U-turn space under the freeway, using the existing left lane? I know it's overcapacity right now. There's 2 lanes going east on Mission Bay Boulevard East, and there was a proposed road diet. But what if that left lane was utilized as a space to have cars line up and make a U-turn to get to Mission Bay Boulevard West without going around the roundabout to decrease traffic in the roundabout?
I don't think that's something that I've considered before. And is definitely not within the scope of this project. But is an interesting idea and something that I can sort of take back and share around. There's a lot of conflicts here, especially like there's a lot of pylons that are holding up the freeway, and managing something like that, I think would pose a lot of technical challenges, but it's an interesting idea. Thank you for raising it.
Sure. I'm just tossing it out there, knowing that traffic at times already backs up pretty badly on Mission Bay Boulevard heading west, which I know you've proposed a third lane. Maybe that could alleviate it, but I think having 3 lanes would really encourage more people to use cars. It would just seem like an arterial. So just a lot of traffic. And just in terms of the current options, I really do like C better. I get all the points that were made, including Mike's point about that very short distance between folks making a right turn and finding themselves crossing the bikeway. But hopefully with raised crossings, people will start to realize that they cannot go quickly exiting the roundabout, and will get used to slowing down, and hopefully that will make up for the fact that there's such a short distance between people exiting the roundabout and encountering the bike crossing.
Good points, Mitch, and you reminded me that there's another thought I wanted to share on that alternative C, is that motorists, as they're entering the roundabout, if there's vehicles in the roundabout, they have to stop and wait. Another unfortunate result of having the offset be small is that any car or large vehicle, especially as they're waiting to enter the roundabout, will be sitting on top of the bikeway. So ideally, what you have in both the entry and exit of a roundabout is enough room for a reasonable, a vehicle you would expect on a regular basis to wait and stop without blocking anybody's path of travel. So I don't know if you want to bring that up, David, the alternative C, maybe be easier to visualize, but you can imagine someone coming into the circle, the driver, if they have to stop at the edge of the circle and wait for traffic within it, which you're supposed to do in a roundabout, you yield to all traffic within a circle, you're going to be sitting on top of the bikeway, which is another, not only on the exit is it a problem, on the entry it's a problem. And here having 2 raised crossings becomes a drainage issue, a bigger problem, as opposed to 1 consolidated crossings. And then here you have motorists having to think about, okay, first I have to cross the crosswalk, and then I have to cross the bikeway, and then now I have to enter the circle. So you're having 3 decision points as opposed to 2. While you're making that 3rd decision point, like I said, you're sitting on top of the bikeway. So again, I know it looks nice. I actually think there's more problems with this design than people realize, and I'm trying to share those thoughts in a clear way. So if anything I said doesn't resonate, or if you want some more clarification, we can talk more about any particular aspect of this design.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bettina, go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, basically, thank you for this wonderful town hall and the presentation. And it's a lot of information, and I know David mentioned how you guys were going to collect our feedback, but I didn't quite get it. I mean, I'm wondering, I was listening specifically, is there going to be another, say, online survey like you distributed last year? And I'm just, if you can just, make that clear to me, how you're going to collect feedback after we've had a chance to digest all of this.
Yeah, sure thing. So We're not planning to distribute another survey, like we did in our sort of first round of outreach. What we're doing is we're offering presentations to any community-based organizations that would like it. We'll have sort of open format discussions and collect feedback like this. I know you also have Daniela's email, so you're welcome to sort of provide feedback. I know you already have provided helpful feedback at a few different junctures through that avenue. And the presentations are available on our website now for anyone to sort of download and mull over. We'll also be presenting at the Mission Bay CAC coming up in March. So that's another venue that's open to everyone and would welcome and encourage folks to come and share thoughts with us. And if anybody has a community-based organization, that would like sort of this presentation and space to talk through and give feedback, please feel free to reach out to Danielle and we can set that up.
I applaud that you'll be back at the Mission Bay CAC with this, and I would like to extend an invitation as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Regina. Hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Ikonisha?
I go by
Okay.
Ina. Hello, everyone.
Oh, Ina, okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering if the goal is to encourage more bicycling or accommodating the cars. If it's the encouraging more bicycling, I believe it's important that we prioritize bike and pedestrian-friendly infrastructure rather than trying to balance cars, bikes, and pedestrians. We all know that traffic is already quite congested in the surrounding areas, and I believe with school opening, it will get even worse. So I was just wondering if we are trying to focus on making the area safer and more accessible for pedestrians as well as the cyclists.
Thanks for the question. Yes, where the goal is to improve safety for people walking and biking to the school site. So that's really what we're focused on. San Francisco as a city does have a Safe Routes to School program, which has a goal of, I think, getting, shoot, I don't want to misquote this, but I think it's 30% of students to walk or bike to school, or making it possible for them to do so. So this is supporting that work and trying to make it as safe as possible to get to the school walking or biking.
Okay, next question from Suzanne. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you. I unfortunately joined the meeting late, so I wasn't able to see the presentation of the alternatives. I just wanted to make a comment as a longtime resident on Berry Street that I beg of you to please give equal weight to the importance of access for residents on Berry Street, as all these other priorities are considered in the neighborhood. You know, transit changes have blocked our ability to enter our street from the south on the eastern end of the street. And so coming in from Mission Bay Boulevard is the primary way, especially with the traffic at 4th and King during rush hour. We're already impacted by the ballpark, by the Warriors. And the need for some kind of dedicated right-hand turn lane headed west onto Berry Street, I just beg of you to please do something about that. And also to consider that we are users 24 hours a day, and try to be as creative as possible about what needs to be there during school hours, and then what impediments could be removed, whether it's changes in the way the signals work for the lights, timing, barriers, etc. That these things do not make it even more difficult and very time consuming as it currently is to just get in and out of our neighborhood.
All right, thank you for that comment, Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further verbal questions, I think we can move over to the questions that we have in the chat. And David, would you just like to read them off, or should I read them? How would you like to do that?
Sure. I see one from Nick Kestner asking whether removing the striped buffer in the existing roundabout is adequate. I'm guessing that that's in relation to alternative C for the roundabout.
Correct.
Yeah, the answer, unfortunately, and somewhat surprisingly, is no. In order to have enough space for large vehicles to make the movements that they need to within the intersection, the actual sort of concrete center circle needs to be shrunk were this alternative to be pursued.
And actually, it's less about the large vehicles, because the smaller circle will still handle large vehicles. It is to create any decent amount of offset between the bikeway and the right turning vehicles coming out of the roundabout. So in order to get to maximize that offset, which is still not meeting ideal distances, the center island the diameter needs to be reduced by about 20 feet. And that's in addition to getting rid of the painted portion. So I certainly wish we could just remove the painted portion and implement this design and get the right offsets and everything, distances. But that's where a big cost and constructability issue comes into play, is when you have to relocate, you have to narrow the island, shrink the island by 20 feet, and relocate all the utilities in that space. And then rebuild the roadway underneath the outer ring. So that's a big cost driver.
Thanks, Mike. I'm jumping around here a little bit in the chat, but I see a question from Heather directed for you, Mike, I think, asking whether you have insights into which of the traffic calming tools that we've called out are likely to be most effective. She notes that she prefers the safest and most effective ones. So if you have sort of any thoughts to share.
Yeah, the most effective traffic calming, when you're retrofitting an existing roadway, is anything that's raised, like what we show as mid-block cushions, also speed humps or raised crosswalks. Because if you speed, you're immediately punished by hitting those elements. Chicanes are nice, and it could be an additional element. What we found actually are the speeds along Mission Bay Boulevard are not incredibly high. There are definitely a handful of bad actors that really speed down the street, especially since there are no stop signs. But the overall speeds are not egregiously high. So I think a handful of these elements on each block, such as the cushions, daylighting, raised crosswalks, can work really well. The chicanes can be nice because they can create space for landscaped islands within the roadway as you shift traffic left and right. But we have to be mindful of accommodating larger vehicles, like emergency vehicles, and that's always a wild card. I hate to say it, but no matter what's decided here, we have to work with our partner agencies like the fire department and ensure that their needs are met in a reasonable manner. So they don't like traffic calming. Let's not pretend, they'd rather not have it, but they get the public safety elements of results from traffic calming. So they do work with us on that. So that's the short answer is, yeah, something raised, 2 or 3 raised elements per block should really help improve safety for bicyclists and for pedestrians.
Thank you.
My light keeps going up.
Wonderful. I see a question from Suzanne, who asks whether there are expectations for crossing guards near the school. And unfortunately, I think my answer to that is we're not sure. The school is going to open in August of 2026, I believe. And I think that sort of determinations about the school's inclusion or exclusion from the from the crossing guard program have not been made to this point and to my knowledge. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to share on that front?
That's correct.
Thank you. And I'll be honest, I just spoke about being a Berry Street resident. That was really aimed at also, asking that you consider the issue of the hours that the needs are there for the school and then what the needs are for residents the rest of the time.
Great. Another chat from Bettina asks whether there's a trade-off for pedestrians, and I apologize if I'm giving anybody sort of motion sickness by scrolling through these slides right now. For pedestrians with the bike route through the park in the parcel sort of north of the roundabout here. I wish I had made these a little easier to read, but the I don't know, pale colored arc in the top left is within that future park is a shared multi-use path. So that is currently designed as a pathway that is shared between cyclists and pedestrians. So that's sort of built into the park design there.
So would there be a trade-off there? I mean, would we be giving up pedestrians be giving up sidewalk?
There's nothing there right now. So there's no pedestrian trade-off from the existing condition. And you can see there's a sidewalk that abuts the roadway there that is a dedicated pedestrian pathway. So
And looking at this, you have a alternative A. Was that actually the one? Because that one I was clear that pedestrians are giving up half of the sidewalk to the bicyclists, but I thought was that not in my question, not in reference to alternative C?
Good question. I guess I didn't clarify. That park, the design of the park with the multi-use path in the northwest corner is consistent across all of our recommendations. So that park has already been designed, and the Mission Bay Development Group is hoping to deliver it soon, sort of as quickly as they're able to acquire permits and start construction. So that design is consistent across all of our alternatives, that park design.
Okay.
Natalie Larson in the chat asks what the impact of these alternatives will be to traffic flow. None of these, we don't anticipate any of these alternatives having major impacts on motor vehicle flows, with the exception of impacts during the construction period. And so that was one of our metrics for evaluation here, was the timeline and construction impact. Alternatives B and C would have a significantly more challenging impact from a construction perspective, because there are actual adjustments to the roadway in those alternatives, whereas alternative A is the impacts are limited to the ramps where the pedestrian bike facilities approach the roadway.
Hey, Dave, there was actually, I went back and I looked at where I asked that question, and that's had to do with down at Mission Bay Drive, where people want that dedicated right turn lane, which I totally understand why the drivers want that and all. And you need to put the bicycle path then into, move that over into the park area, right? That's the idea, if we can ever get that park finished. What is that going to affect any of the sidewalk there for the pedestrians? Because I walk along there a lot. Okay.
Yeah, great question and astute observation. The
Yes.
answer is it very likely would.
It would? It
there would
would take sidewalk away?
Let me rephrase. we need to be thoughtful about the bike and pedestrian impacts or the bike and pedestrian interactions were this concept to be pursued. This is included within our batch of sort of mid-range vision ideas, Bettina. So it is not something that the study is including in our core recommendations. We are capturing it as an idea that we think could potentially advance study goals, but questions like that about the bike and pedestrian trade-offs and sort of more detailed design questions would need to be figured out and weighed in a separate study. So astute observation, I think the answer is we need to be thoughtful about how those things interact, and we don't plan on doing that in this phase of work.
There's not a lot of land right there because the water is there as well. And I don't know if you can build an extension or something, but the fact is a lot of people walk along that sidewalk. And that's now. There'll be more when there's a school there, and also the building that's going to be built with like maybe 500 units in it. So I ask you not to keep taking away the sidewalk space from pedestrians, because we're going to need the sidewalks.
Thank you for the comment.
All right. This is Natalie Larson. Thank you for answering my question. Yeah, my only why I posed that, and thank you for this presentation. This was super helpful. You know, I think that my concern is just what is the impact in terms of the traffic flow, and I think you answered that, which was super helpful in terms of all your alternatives that you presented. Just because, you know, you've got a lot of kids and a lot of parents in the school, and some of them are going to walk, some of them are going to, you know, use bikes, but a lot of them are going to drive. And so, you know, you don't want to get clogged situations of coming in and out of school. So
thanks for the comment.
Yep.
Could I make a follow-up question or comment on what Bettina just said?
I only have a small screen to work with, so I'm going to say yes, and then I'll ask Daniela to sort of figure out who speaks next.
Oh, I can wait. I'm sorry. I don't mean to go out of order. I can't see either who's in line.
I'm not sure there is a line. So Dan, why don't you jump and ask your follow-up question, and then Daniela, if you could just call on the next person, I think that
Sure.
Thank you. It's Suzanne again from Berry Street, just talking about that issue of the sidewalk that turns onto Berry Street and how many pedestrians that use that. I just want to agree and emphasize that point and the importance of not making less space for pedestrians, especially there's many people walking dogs, which would, you know, just add to the conflict with cyclists in a small area. But more importantly, I wanted to also point out there is not, to my knowledge, really a bike lane that goes across the railroad tracks on the other side of Berry Street. So it's kind of a strange thing. And I really think there should be consideration to whether there's a way to put all the bike traffic on just one side of Mission Bay Boulevard to where there is a dedicated gated pedestrian crossing of the railroad tracks versus bikes kind of having to it's already a very dangerous turn for cyclists crossing the railroad tracks and taking a right on Berry. So that's just sort of another thing to suggest to minimize conflict around that corner of Mission Bay onto Berry Street.
Sure.
And I apologize, I don't know if that was in your plans in any way, since I had missed the earlier part of the meeting.
Thanks for the comment. That's a really complicated intersection, and appreciate sort of the direction about where the emphasis needs to be placed.
There's a few more questions. There's another question that came up in the chat from Sarah Bertram. Would the multi-use pathway look like the rest of the design, or would it look differently?
So the current design for that multi-use pathway is as a shared pathway. So it would be a different facility design than our recommendations.
I think most of the questions in the chat have been answered, and I saw that Sarah Davis, you had your hand up, but you put your hand down. Do you still have a question, or was that an accident?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you guys come to the mission-based CAC, I just want to encourage everybody on this call who wakes up in the middle of the night and wishes they had asked a question, send them to you guys in advance so that when we're at the CAC, we're like, really, you guys aren't going back to ask questions and we're really answering people's questions. And then can you bring, there's the active park that you're going to cut into. Can you guys bring a full blow up of that park with this with the cutout so that we can look at that active space with a little reduced footprint and how that's going to affect that space?
We can work with Luke at Mission Bay Development Group to make sure we're sort of there jointly to talk about what that might look like.
Yeah, it was originally planned to be a baseball diamond, and something like this I think would change a baseball stadium. And then and so it might change what functions we can have in that park.
Thanks, sir.
Jan, go ahead. You have one more question.
Hi. Yes, on the jug handle, since we haven't brought it up much, I brought it up earlier in the written comments in the chat. One of my main concerns there, as like someone who's tried to use this intersection as a bicyclist and as a pedestrian, my first time there, I tried to use the pedestrian crossing and I used the so-called back button to wait for the pedestrian signal to cross the street there. And it is unfathomably long to wait there, even if you push the button. It would be nice to see that improved in a way where like pedestrians, if they're given some priority in the queue of different phases to run. Especially if we're going to expect more modes to be using this. In addition, it's always a bit unclear like what you're supposed to do as a bicyclist in this intersection, even if you're continuing forward. So it'd be nice to see some improvement there. But yeah, the main thing that I want to say that isn't really visible in those like overhead pictures is the time to cross the street is so extremely long that something needs to be modified there should a project be drafted.
Thanks for the input, Jan. I'll add just briefly that the signal timing at this intersection is deeply complicated. A lot of it complicated by Caltrain, and Caltrain is planning to run more trains through here. So, heard. It's tough. Maybe we have time for one or two more.
Yeah, okay, Mitch, go ahead. You have one. Yeah, we have about 7 minutes left. So Mitch, go ahead. We have your question.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't see this in any of the earlier slides, but for the options that focus on Mission Bay Boulevard heading east, are there any accommodations for cyclists that want to turn left from Mission Bay Boulevard Drive onto 7th? The reason I bring this up is because the other option out of Mission Bay, the other main option out of Mission Bay heading more or less in this direction on 16th Street has a very, very skinny bike lane. I actually measured it once. It's only 4 feet. It's between a right turn lane and a bus lane, which feels kind of uncomfortable. And I really wonder how many parents with kids who are trying to find their way out of, find the best way from the school across the tracks where they feel they really need to make a left, what they're going to choose exactly. And I'm sure you've thought about this, but what are your thoughts? Thank you.
I guess I'd invite Mike to speak to this. Mike, if you don't have any sort of a response top of mind, I'm happy to take the question, but I'm curious if you do. I don't want to step on your toes.
Yeah, it's a valid concern that making a left turn out of this space is challenging. Most traffic coming out of Mission Bay onto 7th is going right because they're kind of heading in that westerly direction. And if they were going southwesterly, for instance, they probably exit at 16th Street. At 16th Street is where you have that narrow bike lane and that crossing. So the two crossings in and out of Mission Bay in this area onto 7th are not great by any means. On a separate note, I've been advocating for a bike ped overcrossing of the tracks, but we'll see if that ever happens. That would be a nice amenity to have, especially as the gates are going to go down far more frequently for higher frequency Caltrain, and maybe one day high-speed rail, if that ever happens. It's just gonna be really hard to get out of Mission Bay in general. So I know we improved the exit and entry to Mission Bay at 3rd Street via the bridge with the two-way bikeway that's separated, so that's great. And I think the east edge along Terry Francois has been improved. But this west side, southwest side is challenging, and there's no doubt about it. So all that to say is I don't have a great answer, but to acknowledge that it's something, it's a challenge, no doubt.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I think, thank you, everybody, for, this has been a very robust, interesting conversation. And before David does final words, I did, dropping again my email in the chat. I think most of you have it because most of you have heard from me, but in case you don't, you can contact me via email, and if you were interested in a presentation with your group, we'd be happy to follow up with that if you have follow-up questions, because there is a lot of information here. So wanted to offer that again.
Wonderful. I don't really have many words of wrap up beyond just a few words of thanks. I really appreciate everyone coming out and spending your evening in this way. It's really valuable. And appreciate all of the feedback. We'll be taking it into consideration as we move towards final recommendations and eventually sort of final report and implementation plan. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you also on behalf of everyone from the Transportation Authority. Just thank you all for your time and your insight and your interest in this.